Seeley.
Are you ready to start, Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
It's a pleasure, as ever, to serve under your chairmanship. I think this might be the first time, but thank you. I'm most grateful to the Minister for being here and her team, which is good to see. The purpose of Westminster Hall debates, as the Minister is aware, is often to raise issues of considerable importance at a constituency or through groups of constituency level. And I've called this debate to discuss the Isle of Wight's needs in regards to two things, which are important to many parents on the Isle of Wight: special education needs disability, SEND, and also education and healthcare plans, EHCPs, which I know the Minister is familiar with and in her new role is becoming more familiar with. These outline special education needs a child has and a plan that a local authority has to put in place to support that child. I'd like to speak for about 10 minutes, probably not more, just to outline some background and then to ask the Minister a series of questions. And I'm aware that the Minister has not received a copy of my speech. I did tend to write them at the last minute sometimes. I do apologise. And so I'm not expecting specific verbal answers from her at the moment. It would be great to get some written responses to some of the issues that I would like to raise because, as I say, they are important to my constituents and the children of the Isle of Wight. Right from the outset, I'd like the Minister to be aware of the higher percentages on the island in regards to SEND provision, special education needs disability provision, but also the education and healthcare plan provision on the island as compared to the national average. On the island, 4.4% of kids have an EHCP, an education and healthcare plan. The national average is 3.1, so we're roughly a third more. On the island, SEND covers 12.7% of the school population. The national average is 11.9, so nearly 1% greater. November last year, and we've undergone in the last decade quite substantial education reforms on the island, which we're right to do, but have put education under pressure on the island as well. In November of last year, Ofsted and the CQC conducted a week-long joint inspection of the Isle of Wight to judge our effectiveness in implementing the Disability and Special Education Needs reforms which were set out in the Children and Families Act of 2014, and I'm sure the Minister is familiar with them. Overall, they were content with what they saw from the island's authority, and in a letter to it, they wrote that children and young people were getting an improved deal, which is excellent to note, on the island. Leaders across education, health and care are committed to tackling historically poor support that the children have received, and it is highly regrettable that historically poor support has been there, and that may be one reason for higher EHCP education and healthcare plans now. We'll come on to potential reasons in a little bit. Our strengths were seen to be strong early identification and support in early years, a strong early help offer, joint working supporting early identification, increasingly effective identification and supporting children and young people who may have ASD, generally well-informed education and healthcare plans. And as I say, generally, education has undergone significant reform and significant improvement on the Isle of Wight. We slightly went backwards to go forward a few years ago, which is highly regrettable, but our education, our Ofsted reports are steadily improving. There have been difficulties, but our partnership with Hampshire is a good one. We are now voluntarily in that partnership with Hampshire, and we're working to improve standards. And on that point, I'd like to thank the island's teachers for the excellent work they do in helping to raise standards, as well as the kids and parents on the island. And I would also like to recognise the excellent work done by our education officers, Brian Pope, Steve Crocker, as well as Councillor Paul Brading, who leads for the Council at a political level in education. However, the inspection found three areas that needed improvement. First, whilst leaders were committed to putting the needs of children at the heart of their work, this was not always effectively communicated. Secondly, children and parents were not always able to influence the support that they received. And whilst there are good examples of this process, which is, I'm sure the Minister knows as co-production, it was not always a consistent experience for all, which clearly is very regrettable. And education and healthcare plans have improved. However, targets that they had were sometimes imprecise, and older plans were not always kept up to date. Now, with regards to first and third cases particularly, that means that some parents lack confidence in the system. And one of the most consistent groups of people that I've had come to see me in my surgeries on the island are parents, almost always mums, of SEN, of children with SEND needs or with an education and healthcare plan. And during the last Parliament, indeed, I held an event, a sort of round table for parents, with SEND, kids with either SEND or EHCP, sorry for the jargon, to meet with council and education officers. And it was clear that one of the main issues that the parents had was the need for the council and for the authorities to communicate more and to produce more joint working with officers, with schools, and with parents, so that parents could fully put their trust into the system, which was sometimes lacking, especially because we were going through so many other reforms and other improvements that needed to be taking place at the time. So in fact, for the island to be in the top half of its review last year, I thought it was testament to the fact that we are improving, and despite the upheavals that have taken place in island education, we were still able to produce a significant, decent work on SEND and EHCP plans under the 2014 Act. So our Education Authority has pledged to work harder at co-producing a co-producing strategy with parents and communicating better. More generally, I welcome much of what this government is doing and congratulate the Minister. It is boosting higher needs funding by over £750 million to ensure that children can reach their full potential. This is a 12% increase. The number of teaching assistants is increasing, I think, by 50,000 in the past decade to over 250,000, some 264,000. And we're pledging a further 31.6 million being allocated for additional educational psychologists from September 2020, playing an important role clearly in identifying children who may have SEND issues and may need to have care plans. And I know on the island there was a considerable delay in assessing children on the autistic spectrum disorder because of the lack of the appropriately qualified people. And I know that that has now been sorted, but at the time I think it caused considerable distress. Most importantly, for the reasons I'm speaking in this debate, I understand that a review has been launched into the 2014 Act in how we support children with special education needs, and the review will consider how to boost outcomes and ensure the right support is in place for children with those needs. And again, I remind the Minister of the key point here that we have a considerably higher proportion of children on EHCP than the national average, 4.4 compared to 3.1 for children requiring education healthcare plans, and for children who are for whom SEND are covered by SEND, 12.7%, so nearly 13% of the school population, as opposed to nearly 12%. And because we are getting those plans, the EHCP plans, to children quickly, the costs kick in more quickly than they would in other authorities where those plans take longer to come to fruition. So effectively, our efficiency in producing plans does result in an additional cost as well. Now, when it comes to reasons for a higher level of plans on the island, there are potential theories to explain this. I think talking to the education officers and some head teachers that I've done consistently over the last few years, the previous gaps in educational attainment caused by some historically lower standards may be one reason for the increased level of EHCP plans. I have questioned also whether we have a slightly more paternal attitude on the island, which means that we want to, not statement, but we want to identify kids with SEND issues or who may need to have education and healthcare plans. I've also talked to head teachers about whether a pushy parent factor kicks in, and I know that could be an issue in some parts of the UK. But having spoken to head teachers about this, including one last week, education officials, including last week, Councillor Paul Brady, including yesterday, not last night, they are all adamant that our standards for EHCP plans, that's whether young people get those plans, are consistent with a national average. And we on the island are not statementing, or whatever the phrase that the Minister is comfortable with, we are not statementing children to a high percentage, or there's no lower threshold or lower hurdle or lower barrier than there is elsewhere. So our standards in assessing are consistent and are producing higher levels of children needing EHCP. Either way, Mr. Robertson, it's important for me to express this to the Minister that because we have higher than average requirements for SEND and EHCP, we have more pressure on the school system, more pressure on our funding, both the funding that we get for specialised care, but also more generally the funding. Because as my educational authority explains, if a child has an EHCP, an education and healthcare plan, the school funds approximately the first £6,000 of that. And then the local authority finds money from the higher needs block. So the more children and young people we have with plans, as I'm sure the Minister can see for herself, the greater the cost to our overall budgets and the greater pressure that we have on schools. And those are schools that are already under pressure to produce better results because of historic failings that we've had in the past decade. So that is the critical point that I'm trying to make. That we have greater, because we have more children with EHCP and more children who have an NSEND statement of diagnosis, the more that our schools are having to bear that cost. And that is going to put our budgets under severe strain, despite the increased funding, which I know the Minister would mention, and I'm delighted about, which I think is going to mean that a primary school from next year certainly is going to have £4,000 per pupil, and a secondary school will have £5,000 per pupil. So these are increases, and almost every single school on the island will benefit, which is excellent, because we want to level up everywhere, not just in the north, and that means helping poorer areas and poorer constituencies in the southeast and the southwest, in the south, and I know that her PPS is from a constituency not dissimilar for some of those issues, which is important. So coming to the crux of what I want to ask the Minister, there is also an additional rumour that the first £10,000 for EHCPs and for SENDs may be found out of school budget. So I have 5 questions, I think, for the Minister now. Can we scoff the idea that the £6,000 commitment, the first £6,000 to be found by schools, is going up to £10,000? And is the Minister aware that the pressure that that would put schools who have a higher commitment for EHCPs, for education and healthcare, but also for SEND, is she aware of the pressure that that would put schools everywhere in the UK under that have that issue, but especially in constituencies like mine, the Isle of Wight? The higher the HCP, the higher the pressure. Does she accept that the pressure on island education resources is nearly 50% higher than it would be on the mainland because of the increased number of children with healthcare plans? Apart from general responses, what support can the Minister offer to island schools to cope with a caseload that is significantly higher than the national average? And if she's more comfortable writing to me on that point, I would be delighted to receive a letter from her on it. And finally, last 2 points, how would the review better support children and families on the Isle of Wight? And can she reassure me that the review will listen to evidence from educational authorities such as the island and from members of Parliament representing constituencies such as the island, like myself? Thank you very much.
The question is that this House has considered special educational needs on the Isle of Wight. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. It's a pleasure to always have you into the chair. And can I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for the Isle of Wight on securing this important debate. I know that he is always a passionate advocate for the island and for all of its people. Supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities is one of the most important roles for government. It is our ambition for every child, no matter what challenges they face, to have access to world-class education that helps set them up for life. And I welcome this opportunity to talk about our work on behalf of those children and young people. I am the new Minister for Children and Families, and I will be building on the work of my predecessors who've all shown tireless commitment to this issue. my honourable friends, the members for Chippenham, Saffron Walden and now Edisbury, and my right honourable friend, the member for Scarborough and Whitby. I thank them all. I look forward to working in partnership with leaders from across education, health and care, and with fellow ministers across all departments to make sure that we build on the progress that's been made. Across England today, over 1.3 million pupils have special educational needs. And on the Isle of Wight alone, it's over 1,000 children and young people have education, health and care plans, and a further 2,250 are in receipt of SEND support. As was mentioned, in 2014 we introduced major reforms to improve and streamline the support provided to children and young people with SEND and to put their needs and those of their families at the heart of the SEND system. Local authorities, clinical commissioning groups, parents, teachers and health and care workers have all worked to shape and to implement those reforms. And I'd like to put on the record my thanks to the vital contribution they all continue to make to the lives of children, young people and families. In October 2019, last October, we heard in a detailed report from the Education Select Committee that the reforms introduced in 2014 were the right ones. Most parents support them, and through parent carer forums, parents are providing a crucial voice in local SEND decision-making. However, the implementation of the reforms has been variable. I'd like to also thank Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission for their work on the inspections of SEND services. These were first introduced in May 2016 and will see all local areas in England inspected by 2021. The inspections have identified a range of strengths in the ways local areas are delivering the reforms, as well as areas for improvement. These reports and inspections are a key driver for change. We know, however, that concerns remain in some areas, particularly from parents, about the way the reforms have been delivered across the country. In 54 of the 108 reports published so far, these have required the completion of a written statement of action, setting out how the partners will bring about the required improvement. And we are working with partners, including NHS England, to support and change local areas to address their areas of development, as well as areas of significant weakness requiring an action plan. Ofsted and CQC then revisit local areas, and these show that progress is being made with improving services, but there is more work to do. In 6 out of the 17 areas revisited so far, inspectors found that sufficient progress had been made against every single area of weakness previously identified. And where the progress has been strongest, the role of senior local leaders in driving forward improvement has been pivotal. Leadership matters. The Isle of Wight SEND inspection report was published earlier this month. And inspectors report that leaders across education, health and care are working hard to tackle historically poor support received by children and young people with SEND. The leaders are complimented for having a good understanding of what's going well for children and young people with SEND, for the early identification of SEND in babies and young children, which is strong, and there is a well-established model of early help. The inspectors also highlighted positive employment outcomes for young people on the island. Almost all young people with SEND go on into education, employment or training as a result of the support provided. And the island's local council's supported internship programme is worthy of specific note. I want to see more young people with complex needs getting this type of opportunity and being able to move into paid work both on the island and across England. These are all positive results for children and young people on the Isle of Wight, and I do not underestimate the work that was involved in getting to this point. I want to congratulate local leaders across education, health and care on their commitment to improving the services. However, the inspectors, as the Honourable Member for the Island pointed out, also identified some further areas of development, particularly around improving communications with parents and increasing opportunities for them to help shape local services in their local area, not just for their own children, but for the wider community too. We have, as a department, invested £2.3 million in the development of parent carer forums each year since the reforms were introduced. And with the support of the charity Contact and the national network of parent carer forums, membership of parent carer forums has now risen to more than 90,000. We're also supporting the Council for Disabled Children and the charity for Charity Kids to improve participation by children and young people. And every local authority has in place an information, advice and support service which provides impartial, free advice for families. We do know that demand for EHCP plans is high on the Isle of Wight, with 4.4% of the children have a plan, putting them in the top quintile for all EHCP plans. And this can cause challenges in ensuring that every child and young person has provision to meet their needs. A high level of EHCPs does not necessarily mean that that area has higher than average underlying need, and we do not allocate high needs funding to local authorities just on the basis of the number of EHC plans they have. This would encourage local authorities to put more children and their parents through the statutory assessment process than is necessary to meet those needs. Our funding formula includes proxies that indicate relative levels of needs, such as the numbers of pupils with very low attainment to key stages of the education, the number of disabled children whose parents receive disability allowance, and other factors. We are planning to start a review of the high needs funding formula later this year, including the £6,000 contribution as part of the call for evidence. And we will comment on that in due course and write to the Honourable Member for the Island on this. However, in the review, we want to make sure that we fund local authorities using the most appropriate measures of need going forward, and every local authority will see an increase in high needs funding with an increase of 12%, that is 780 million next year for those with the most complex special educational needs and disabilities. We have invested a total of £365 million, £1 million for every day of the year, through the Special Provision Capital Fund from 2018-19 to 2020-21 to create places and improve facilities for children with SEND. This is a challenging issue for most local areas, perhaps even more so in an island context. The Isle of Wight has been allocated a total of £849,000 to review their special schools capital provision, which is a key part of making sure specialist schools places are available where needed for those with the most complex issues. However, it is worth remembering that most children with SEND are educated within mainstream schools and colleges. Children, young people and parents should and do have a strong say, and mainstream schools and colleges with the right level of support and training should be able to meet the needs of the vast majority of children with SEND without the need for an educational, health and care plan. To support them in this, my department has awarded a 2-year contract to Nason and University College London to help embed SEND into school improvement. We're also funding regional SEND leaders to bring together local networks and schools in a community of practice and help schools to improve provision for children and young people with SEND. Our ambitious vision for education must be backed with strong investments in schools. And that is why we have announced the biggest funding boost for schools in a decade. We've delivered on the Prime Minister's pledge to level up school funding, providing an increasing for our lowest funded schools so that every child can benefit from an outstanding education. In 2021, every secondary school will be allocated at least £5,000 per pupil, and every primary school will be allocated at least £3,750, leaving those primary schools firmly on the path to receiving £4,000 for pupil the following year. In the Isle of Wight, this includes schools such as both Cowes Primary School and Gunner Primary School, which will see per pupil funding level up to at least £3,750 per pupil next year. Through the national funding formula, mainstream schools on the Isle of Wight will attract 3.9% more per pupil in 2021, and that's an additional £3.5 million in total cash funding. However, we know that increasing the amount of funding cannot be our only response to the pressures that local authorities and schools are facing. And that is why last year we concluded a Children in Need review. We're taking action to improve the outcomes of children in need of help and protection, as well as those with special educational needs and disabilities, making sure their needs are recognised and that they're able to succeed through high aspiration and effective support in schools. Furthermore, last year the government launched a review of the special educational needs and disability system to see what further improvements are necessary to establish a sustainable and effective SEND system in the future. This review will look at how the system has evolved since the reforms were first introduced in 2014 and how it can be made to work better for all families, all children. The review will ensure quality of provision is the same across the country and joined up across health, care and education. Finally, it will ensure that public money is spent in an effective, efficient and sustainable manner, placing a premium on securing high-quality outcomes for those children and young people who need additional support the most. The government has invested heavily in reforms to the system of support for our most vulnerable children and young people, but we do know that there is further to go, and we are determined to tackle those issues that remain. I thank the Honourable Member for the Isle of Wight for securing this important debate today. I know he cares passionately about all the people of the island, and especially for those who need the most support. Improving the system is no easy task, but inspection reports such as that for the Isle of Wight show that services can work together to achieve real improvements. And working with my colleagues across government, I am determined to ensure that they do achieve this.